Hello, this is Lawrence Holgate, and this is episode 5 of the podcast Understanding Plato. This episode is about a dialogue called Crito. It's the third dialogue in a series called the Socratic dialogues about the last days of Socrates. In your book, if you're following along, in the book Understanding Plato, authored by yours truly, we're now looking at chapter 4, and it's called Crito, the duty to obey the law. The scene in this dialogue is the cell in which Socrates is being held while awaiting execution. Crito enters the cell, the character Crito enters the cell and awakens Socrates to tell him that the time of his execution is near. Crito immediately urges Socrates to agree to a previous offer of his to bribe the jailers and help Socrates escape into exile. And Crito gives two personal reasons why Socrates ought to take this offer. First, he says, "I will lose a friend, the like of whom I'll never find again." Second, he says that the majority of people will think that he wasn't willing to pay the money for a bribe, and he'll get a shameful reputation for valuing money more than friends. Crito later adds to this the remark that, quote, "It's going to seem that we let the opportunity for us to save you and for you to save yourself, we let the opportunity slip because of some vice such as cowardice." Well, after a brief rebuke in which Socrates says that we shouldn't care about what the majority think, and this is a remark he expands on later in the dialogue, Crito responds with a series of arguments appealing to justice, duty to one's children, and standards of virtue and shame. He says, it isn't just, that is, it isn't morally right to throw away your life when you could save it. Second, he says you're betraying those sons of yours by going away and deserting them when you could bring them up and educate them. Thirdly, you're not choosing to do what a good and brave man would choose, particularly when one claims to have cared about virtue throughout one's life. This is shameful. So Crito here is kind of scolding Socrates and hoping that something is going to get to him to convince him that he ought to escape. But these last three are moral reasons in the sense that they appeal not to Crito's own self-interests, remember, losing a friend, damaging his own reputation, but to the interests of others. For example, Socrates' son, or to a moral standard like justice, virtues like good and brave, vices like cowardice. Consider the distinction between the first and the second of these that I read. The first being, it isn't morally right to just throw away your life when you could save it, and secondly, you're betraying your sons. In the first case, Crito says either one shouldn't have children at all, or one ought to see their education and upbringing through to the end. He cites a rule that confers on a parent an obligation toward his children. In justifying the third case, you're not choosing to do what a good and brave man would do, he cites a standard of behavior to which persons should aspire, the standard of a good and brave man. And according to Crito, if Socrates does not escape and is executed, then he will violate the moral rule that says that he has a duty to educate and bring up his children to the end. He will also fail to meet the standard that tells us what a good and brave man would choose in the same circumstances. So the point is that Crito's piling it on. He's got a lot. He starts out with self-interest, like, look what you're doing to me, Socrates. But then he turns to what I think Socrates would want him to do, namely turn to some moral reasons, like your duty to your children, like being a good and brave man and showing the community what a good and brave man you are. Now, Socrates gives arguments for three important claims he makes in response to Crito's concerns. The first argument is preliminary. Socrates prepares some ground rules about who we should consult when thinking about issues involving justice and injustice. The second and third arguments, which we'll talk about in a little bit later, are substantive. They conclude with major claims about the scope of our duty, not to do unjust acts, and our duty to obey the law. So now, Chapter 4, we're still continuing, 4.2.1 for those who are following along in the book. It's called The One Man. When thinking about just and unjust things, we should consider not what the majority think, but what the person who understands just and unjust things will say, the one man and the truth itself. Socrates uses an analogical argument to prove this claim. He develops an analogy between experts in physical training and experts in moral training, if there are such people. He discusses a situation in which disciples or students in physical training listen to the praise and blame and opinion of one man only, their physician or a trainer, and not to the majority. I mean, suppose, for example, that you've decided to train for the pole vault in track and field competition, or you want to train for the backstroke in swimming competition. You decide not to listen to what the majority might say about how to train for these events. Instead, you would consult only the experts. You would not take a notebook, go out on the streets, and conduct interviews with random people about how best to train for the pole vault. You would not consult them because their advice would make it much more likely that something bad would happen to your body if you listened to them instead of listening to the advice of experts. So Socrates concludes that you should fear the blame and welcome the praise of that one man, but not those of the majority of people. Socrates now applies this general conclusion to those situations in which we need moral advice. He's making an analogy here. He says, in cases of just and unjust things, shameful and fine ones, good and bad ones, we should not follow or fear the opinion of the majority, but respect and fear only the opinion of the one man, if there is one man who understands these things. Now, if we fail to follow the opinion of this one man, this expert, then we would seriously damage and maim, quote, that part of us which is made better by what's just but is destroyed by what's unjust. Finally, Socrates observes, our lives are not worth living when the part of us that's maimed by what's unjust and benefited by what's just is seriously damaged. Now, Socrates here just leaves us wondering about the identity of this one man. He never explains it. Where are we to find this person? And what part of us will be seriously damaged by injustice? All these ideas just leave us hanging. He doesn't answer them right now. Let's go to the next section. The duty never to do injustice to anyone. This is 4.2.2 in the book. The duty never to do injustice to anyone. Socrates turns to the central question of the dialogue. Is it unjust for him to escape from jail? He gives two arguments for an affirmative answer. First, Socrates states a simple moral principle. Doing injustice in any circumstance is bad and shameful for the one who does it. I'll repeat that. Doing injustice in any circumstance is bad and shameful for the one who does it. Now, before we agree or disagree with Socrates, it would be prudent to ask what kind of truth is being asserted. Does he take this to be an analytic truth, or does he take it to be a synthetic truth? Now, I'm going to break off here because I want to explain what these terms mean. A proposition or a sentence is analytically true when the predicate is entirely contained in the meaning of the subject. For example, it is analytically true that triangles, the subject, are three-sided shapes because the predicate, three-sided, is contained in the very meaning of the subject triangle. So if I say triangles have three sides, then the subject term is triangles, and having three sides is the predicate. In this case, the predicate, three-sidedness, is contained in the concept of triangle. So it is logically impossible for something to be a triangle and not have three sides. That's what we mean by analytically true. If I say to you, a triangle has three sides, that is a true statement, and it's true because that's the very definition of triangle. A proposition, on the other hand, is synthetically true. This is a contrast now. Synthetically true when the predicate is not contained in the meaning of the subject. It may be true or false, but not because the predicate has anything to do with what is in the meaning of the subject. For example, it is true, but synthetically true, that human beings stand less than 25 feet in height. We would all say, yeah, that's true. Human beings are less than 25 feet in height. But the height of a human is not part of the meaning of the word human. If you go to a dictionary, they're not going to tell you what height humans are. It is logically possible that there is or will be a human who someday is more than 25 feet in height. I know it sounds incredible, but it could be the case that at some point in let's say the future, a human being grows to be 25 feet. It would be a true statement. Now, that being said, let's get back to the original talk about the duty never to do injustice. The question I want to ask is Socrates giving us an account of how people respond to injustice when they see it? Or is he telling us that the concept of injustice logically implies an act that is bad and shameful? We could also ask a related question about how Socrates knows this principle to be true. He says, is this knowledge he has a priori? That is it knowledge that is prior to or independent of any experience of the natural world? Or is this knowledge he has that injustice is always bad and shameful? Is it true a posteriori? That is his knowledge based on or posterior to his actual observation and experience of the world? So let's go now to logic lesson number 2. I'm going to call it number 2. This is footnote 21. Let's talk about a priori versus a posteriori. A priori is in the Latin. It's a Latin term. The letter A, priori, like our word prior, Priori is the Latin. A priori is a term that denotes reasoning or knowledge which proceeds from theoretical deduction rather than from observation or experience. For example, we know a priori that all bachelors are unmarried, and we know this prior to any observations we might make of any actual living bachelor. In order to know that all bachelors are unmarried, we don't know this because all the bachelors we've ever seen are unmarried. It's not an observational remark. By contrast, a posteriori, a again, and then the next word posteriori just means posterior. Posterior means after. Posteriori. A posteriori denotes reasoning or knowledge that proceeds from observations or experience. For example, we know a posteriori that there are no human beings over 25 feet in height because we've never observed or had an experience of humans who are this tall. Now, if you connect what I previously said about analytic and synthetic, analytic propositions are known to be true a priori because we don't use observation or experience. A proposition that is synthetically true or false is connected to a posteriori knowledge. So the example I just gave, we know a posteriori that there are no humans over 25 feet in height. So you've got the proposition, the synthetic proposition, that no human being is over 25 feet, and you know that proposition, the synthetic proposition, you know it to be a posteriori true. You know it by observation and experience. All right? Now just think about that a little bit. Analytic and synthetic is a division we make between sentences or kinds of propositions or sentences. A priori and a posteriori are about kinds of knowledge that we have, or we claim we have, okay? And of course, we want to say that analytic propositions are known to be true a priori, and synthetic propositions are known to be true or false a posteriori. Got it? All right, let's keep going. Just hang in there. If we accept the proposition that Socrates has made earlier, you've probably forgotten what that is. Earlier, Socrates said that doing injustice is in any circumstance bad and shameful for the person who does it. If we accept that as true, then we must also accept that one shouldn't do injustice in return for injustice. Let me repeat that. One should not do injustice in return for injustice. The logic is simple. I'll repeat. The logic is simple. If injustice is always bad and shameful, and doing injustice in return for injustice is, by definition, a kind of injustice, then it is always bad and shameful to do injustice in return for injustice. Socrates now expands this to all kinds of wrongdoing. One should never do wrong, including doing wrong in return for having suffered wrongdoing. For example, if you come up behind me, knock me unconscious, and steal my wallet, and I later do the same to you, we've both done wrong. The logic is the same. Assume that the word wrongdoing means or implies an action we should never do. Suppose that's what wrongdoing is. Wrongdoing implies an act we should never do. That is, when I say to you, it is wrong to knock someone unconscious and steal their wallet, then I imply that you ought never to knock someone unconscious and steal their wallet. It would be logically contradictory to assert the first sentence and deny the second. The question then becomes whether we can come up with any counterexamples to Socrates' claim. Are there any situations in which it would not be wrong to knock someone unconscious and steal their wallet? Think about it. Socrates now believes that he's proved the following. One must never do injustice in return, nor wrong any man, no matter what one has suffered at his hands. Now, we can now see where he's going with this. Assuming that it is unjust for the official court of Athens to have found Socrates guilty and to have ordered him executed, this is irrelevant to the question whether he, Socrates, ought to escape or not to escape. Socrates says that he must find a way to prove that it would be just, or not unjust, to escape. Doing an injustice to the city in return for the injustice they have done to me, Socrates would say, does not make it justifiable for me to escape. So if somebody knocks me on the head, I have no right to knock him on the head. I guess we could say except in self-defense, but Socrates doesn't go there. Finally, the authority of the law. In order to answer his question about the authority of the law, Socrates performs a simple thought experiment. He personifies the laws. That is, he imagines the laws as a single person who confronts him as he is about to escape. The laws speak to Socrates and inform him that a city cannot continue to exist. It would be overthrown if its legal judgments were deprived of authority and undermined by the actions of private individuals. The laws tell Socrates that by escaping he would be acting on his private judgment about the decision of the court, and private judgments cannot be tolerated in a functioning legal system. Moreover, the laws remind him that his refusal to obey would be in violation of the agreement between you and us, Socrates. You agreed to stand by whatever judgments the city rendered. The agreement to obey the law is not an express agreement. Socrates has not taken an oath in spoken words or in writing that he will obey Athenian law. Instead, his agreement with the city is tacit or implied. It is implied by the fact that Socrates has lived his entire life in Athens, accepting all the benefits of the city and the protection of its laws, and fully understanding that he could have left the city and gone to live elsewhere at any time. This implies that Socrates has agreed with us by his action to do whatever we command. That's what the laws tell Socrates. You have agreed with us by your action to do whatever we command. And Socrates has two choices. He must either persuade the laws that they're doing something that isn't right, or he must obey the laws. He's already tried and failed to persuade the court that their decision is unjust. Therefore, he must obey the law. The law says that anyone found guilty must submit to the decision of the court about the manner of his punishment. And the court has voted for the death penalty. Therefore, Socrates has an obligation not to attempt an escape from jail, and he must submit to his execution. Now, in contemporary moral philosophy, the preceding type of argument, as used by the laws, is called deontological or non-consequentialist. I know those are big words. Deontological, D-E-O-N-tological, or sometimes non-consequentialist. Such arguments are backward-looking. That is, they base a moral obligation on something that has happened in the past. In the case of Socrates, the relevant past event is an implied agreement between Socrates and the laws. However, the laws also remind Socrates about the consequences of a successful attempt to escape from jail and go into exile. Quote, "For consider now, if you break those agreements, if you commit any of these wrongs, what good will you do yourself or your friends? What good will you do yourself or your friends by breaking these agreements?" Arguments based on these considerations are called consequentialist. They're forward-looking. That is, they look to future events for justification of one's actions, specifically the good or bad consequences of possible actions. And the laws mention several bad consequences of Socrates making an escape from jail. First, the laws remind Socrates that by escaping, he risks his friends being exiled, disenfranchised, or having their property confiscated. Secondly, Socrates may also not be received well in any of the cities to which he does escape. They might accept the judgment of the Athenian court and not want to expose their children to the corrupting influence of Socrates. Third, Socrates also risks damaging the reputation he's achieved over the years for being a brave and a virtuous man. He instead will be seen as someone, quote, so greedy for life that he dared to violate the most important laws. Fourth, it is also wrong to think that his children would be better off if he takes them with him into exile. It would probably be better if he left them at home so his friends can educate them in Athens. And if this is true, then they will be just as well educated if he goes to Hades. Finally, if he truly believes in life after death, then his reputation will precede him when he reaches Hades, the underworld. The laws of Hades won't receive you kindly there, knowing that you tried to destroy us to the extent that you could. So this is pretty much what we've got from Socrates and Crito. In the next episode, after this, I'm going to talk about Plato's method for determining right and wrong. We'll take a look at that, and we'll talk about some questions for thought and discussion, which we might add to all of this. So I'm going to cut it off at this time. For those of you who would like to purchase a book and follow along as I go through these episodes, you're perfectly welcome to go to my website, www.holgatebooks, books plural, Holgate spelled with a U, HOULGATEBOOKS.com. And if just scroll down on that first page, go to the image of Understanding Plato, the book. Click on it. It'll send you to Amazon.com, where you can purchase a digital copy for less than $5. Okay, pretty low cost these days, I hope. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week again. Bye-bye.